economics. It's your business. All right, let's see what we got in here by Henry Billings. No. Yeah, I don't know. It says 93, but I don't think it's 93. We got some sub-chapters. They are what is economics, how the United States economy works, wages, labor, and taxes, the world of business, the role of government, and comparing economic systems. A world view would be last. Let's see. The strength of the dollar, 126. I think this is a kid's book. I don't know, though. It's definitely old. All right, during the 70s, the dollar was relatively weak compared to its strength in the 60s. When the dollar is weak, it takes more dollars to buy currency from another country. In other words, a dollar has a low exchange rate in terms of other currencies. During the early 1980s, however, the dollar had grown stronger. By 1984, some economists talked about the unstoppable dollar. When the dollar is strong, it takes fewer dollars to buy the currency of other nations. In other words, the dollar has a high exchange rate. By 1988, the dollar had plunged once again. Table 1 shows that in 1980, $1 was worth only 4.2 francs. In 85, that same dollar is worth 8.9 francs. 3 years later, the dollar traded at 0.6 francs. In 80, $1 was worth 226 Japanese yen. 5 years later, the dollar bought 238. In 88, the suddenly weak dollar was worth 128 yen. The same pattern held true for the West German mark, the British pound, and the Swedish krona, as well as other major currencies. How old is this book? Boom. Yeah, let's go back. How old is this thing? It says 93 by People's Publishing Group, so at first I didn't really think 93, but when you're talking about the West Germany mark, the franc, yeah, that's all old stuff, right? Because, you know, West Germany, that was Soviet Union time. Okay, let's go on one more. Let's go on a little bit more. Why did the value of the dollar change in the 80s? Most economists point to the high interest rates of the early 80s as a reason for a sudden surge in the strength of the dollar. These high rates were caused by huge budget deficits. The government had to borrow billions. This drove up the interest rate. But even when interest rates came down, the dollar stayed strong. This showed that the world had great confidence in the American economy. It was growing faster than the economies of most other nations. The dollar plunged during the late 80s because the United States began to run up huge trade deficits. Americans bought large amounts of foreign goods and services during this time. All this foreign buying increased the demand for foreign currencies. At the same time, other nations were not buying similar amounts from the United States. This decreased the demand for American dollar and lowered its value on the world market economy. A strong dollar sounds like a good thing, but nothing in economics is that simple. The strong dollar of the 80s was a mixed blessing, and so was the weak dollar of the late 80s. Boom. We're not going to go any further, but if you would like to read some more about old school policy, all right, we got Alan Greenspan here. So this is quite old, I'm just saying. There you go. That's the difference of the farms from the days. That's a kind of interesting statistic. You see how we have really gone from like a farming community to a city community, because there is no farms. I bet you there's even less now. I mean, it's always kind of interesting to read back in the olden days. said national debt. Let's see if I can find it real quick. In trillion, so we were in $3.5 trillion was our national debt. I wonder how much we are now. Look at this. Think about it. In the 80s, that's around my age, it was at $900 billion. Now, 10 years later, in the 90s, it passed 3 trillion. How much? What are we in debt now? Oh, wow, this thing's moving. A whole bunch of itty bitty numbers. Okay, here we go. So in my birth, around when I was born, we was less than $1 trillion. 10 years later, we're at 3 trillion, right? Yeah. So this would be millions, billions, trillions. Okay. So I'm less than 40 years old. So, just think about this. Wow. The U.S. federal budget deficit, just look at it. This is ridiculous. Anyways, it says $28 trillion. When I was born, less than 40 years ago, we were less than $1 trillion. Wow. And you want to talk about, no wonder Americans are in debt. Look how in debt the whole world, how our government is. You know what I'm saying? Don't follow advice by the government because they're terrible with money.